Hi and welcome to another RPM Technik video. Now you may previously have seen a video we did covering all generations of GT3, but today we're going to focus specifically on 996 GT3 and the standard GT3 and the GT3 RS. So I'm delighted that we've got Greig Daly to talk about all the technicalities of the two cars, specifically because I don't know them all, and also because this could just possibly get a little bit Porsche-phile and a bit nerdy. So Greig, you know all the details. Let's look at the two cars, and let's start off specifically with the bodywork, the components, the weight of the cars.
Yeah, thanks Tim. Well, the 996 generation of GT3 and RS was all retained with a narrow body. So after we had the 6s on the 7s, they went to a wide body chassis. So the car itself weighed 1,380 kilos. When they went to the RS, it actually saved 50 kilograms, which we'll look at where they did that. And again, that might not seem an awful lot of weight, but if you drop it on your foot, it's a lot of kilos. So we'll start at the front of the car and work our way back, looking at the differences in the bodies of them. So first of all, on the front bumpers of both cars, they retain the same bumper design, but the RS has the air ducts cut out in the top of it, which is actually a little bit more to do with aerodynamics than pure weight saving, but still relevant, and we'll come back to that later. Most notably, if anyone's ever popped the bonnet of one of these, you'll see that the bonnets are made from carbon Kevlar, which was pretty revolutionary back then for you know, a standard production car, and obviously saved a little bit of weight there on the badge. Indeed. So the panels themselves are all steel on both cars. We've got carbon mirrors, which is again a small weight saving, negligible, but obviously it's got a really nice styling difference between the two cars. When we come to the back of the car, the rear screen of the vehicles is made from plexiglass, which is again something that Porsche then continued into other models. Back in the sort of 993, 964 days, they just made them out of thinner glass, which the side windows are, but that obviously has a massive weight saving on the vehicle. On the back of the vehicle, we've obviously got a much bigger wing, but this one again is made from really nice carbon fibre and a lightweight top to the engine cover as well. So got some weight savings there, but Porsche actually put a little bit of weight back into the car for safety reasons. So we've got a full roll cage, so extra door bars, which the standard GT3 didn't have, and they did that, as I say, for extra safety, but it does add a little bit of weight. So to be able to still save off 50 kilos from the standard car is pretty good. Both of the chassis of each of the cars is actually built off of a Carrera 4 chassis. It's not because they're four-wheel drive or anything, but the four-wheel drive car had some extra strengthening to the rigidity of it, which clearly these two cars get driven, or were designed to be driven very fast. So from that point of view, it adds a bit of torsional strength to the car. Then finally, we touched on it a little bit earlier, we were talking about brakes and things. The cars do have optional carbon ceramics, which saved a little bit of weight too, or quite a lot of weight. Not really to do with the body, but obviously weight savings anyway.
So Greig, you touched on aerodynamics just now, but what are the differences between the standard and the RS car aerodynamically? Well,
both of the variants of 996 GT3 and RS, they all feature the flat floor, which is something Porsche brought out in 964 onwards. So it wasn't revolutionary, but obviously it smooths out the airflow that comes underneath the vehicle. The GT3 runs 30mm lower than a C2 of equivalent age, and then the RS 10mm lower again. When we go on to suspension, we'll touch on it, but that then is again height adjustable on both cars, so that's from the factory what they were, but obviously a lot of the cars have been changed since. But when you come around to the front of the car, we talked earlier about on the body how the RS has the little ducts on the top of the car. So it actually has a twofold function. One is that it lets a bit of the hot air come out from where the rads are when the cars are getting very hot on circuit, but also it does have some ducting in there, so as the air gets channeled through the centre rad, it gets pushed up over the top of the car and is slightly smoothed out rather than sort of going up and across. It comes through here.
So this was an S-duct before S-ducts were invented.
Correct.
Exactly.
Yes, factoid. Another interesting, and there's going to be some small little tweaks that we're going to talk about here that Porsche made on the cars, was first of all the side skirts on the car. They were actually specially designed for the vehicle because the rear tyre on a GT3 runs a 295 section rather than a 285 section. And the side skirt was designed to manage the airflow to go round the rear tyre because it protrudes a little bit more. we're getting into the nerdy bits here. Both cars run the 295 rear on the car, so both have exactly the same side skirt design. And then underneath the car, we can't see it at the moment, but both have air ducts underneath the lower arms, which channel air up into the brakes on both the front and the rear. And obviously that helps the cooling. Doesn't actually help any downforce, no. But obviously helps the car go quicker on circuit consistently.
The big difference is obviously the rear wing.
Yeah, and actually about a year ago I learned some interesting details about the rear wing on the GT3 that, contrary to what a lot of people think, is actually adjustable. It has a 3-stage adjustment on it, and how you do that is underneath here you'll see these little caps. Yep. So you pop out the caps and then you have to put a little shim in there and it can change the angle of the rear wing, which in itself is quite cool. The RS, exactly the same, you can do the same thing on that, and you do sometimes see cars that live quite a life on circuit have all manner of crazy wings put on the back, but yeah, Porsche did a lot of wind tunnel testing on the car, and you've also got the little ducktail on the back of the vehicle, which is nicely hidden away, and it's the same on the RS. There's also one more small little difference which is quite interesting. So if we see up here where the air gets channeled through as the car's at speed, on the RS there's an extra little intake on the top of it. Oh, yeah. So whilst it doesn't actually help aerodynamics, what it's actually doing is creating a sort of a ram air effect of when the car's moving at speed, channeling more and more air through into the engine bay, which one helped it cool, but also helped the engine gulp in more air to help its, I think it's called volumetric efficiency, to be specific. But all helps, and all of these small tweaks is where we're starting to see the differences between the GT3, which has got a special machine in itself, and an RS.
So Greg, you mentioned earlier that the RS rides 10mm lower than the standard GT3.
Yep.
What differences are there in the suspension?
Well, interesting point, and this is where we start to see some of the differences relating to what we call homologation. So there's certain new cars that have been sort of flouted to be made to meet homologation rules. What that meant was that certain parts of the car had to be the same as a race car to enable that car to compete at whatever level it was going to. So this GT3 RS is the only one so far that Porsche ever homologated for racing. So when we're starting to talk about the suspension parts of the car, this is where they start to come in. So inside here, where the hub carrier is, where all the suspension combines together, these ones allow the car to run much more camber, which if you're running a slick tyre obviously for racing, and also more adjustment, is totally different to the normal GT3. And if you ordered or tried to order a GT3 RS aftermarket suspension kit to fit your GT3, you'll find out it doesn't fit because they're totally different. So both cars though are quite special, you know, for an 18, 19-year-old design car now. You've got fully adjustable suspension, and what we mean by that is we've got height adjustment, we've got toe, camber, and also on these ones they have adjustable anti-roll bars. This was before the era of Porsche introducing the PASM, Porsche Active Stability Management, where you could press the button to make it softer and harder. So it's always hard. And that is a part of the car which you can't change, the bump and rebound settings for the car, so it's already pre-set by Porsche. On the RS, the car actually runs a 10% stiffer bump and rebound sort of setting within the damper itself. And then the springs, because the car is 50 kilos lighter with more aggressive geometry, are also slightly stiffer because to compensate for the lower weight the car has. So both cars can actually be dialed in to suit your preferences, and sometimes you'll find that one of these is running totally standard setup and you'll get in one of these and they feel more aggressive, and that's, you know, down to personal choice and preference.
Were the actual dampers the same?
They were still made by Bilstein, but so obviously different specification, I guess, in terms of internal valving and actual final setup. But yeah, 10% stiffer on these, but same hardware effectively, yes.
And in terms of materials, are there any magnesium or trick metals in the suspension, or are they the same?
They're the same on both of them. As I say, the anti-roll bars have got 5 settings, so that, as you know from racing, can have a massive difference on the handling of the car and turn-in and oversteer, etc. So component-wise, in terms of materials, at this point of Porsche's lineage, they hadn't gotten too exotic, so the running costs are not crazy because they were designed to be a track car.
And interesting, as you said before, the tyre size is the same on both cars.
Yeah, exactly. And back when their cars were new, the RS was launched on a Pirelli tyre. Now we tend to prefer the Michelin, and whether you're using a road car, using it for the road on a PS2 or even a PS4S, if you're using the car a bit more aggressively on circuit, obviously we've got the Cup 2s, which thankfully they now fit to these cars, which just gives them grip levels that they couldn't imagine back then.
That would have been the slick level grip then.
Probably was.
Greg, you talked about adjustability on the rear, but I think there was some differences for adjustability on the front as well.
Absolutely, actually two now you mention it. So we've got top mounts which you can swing around 120 degrees, and then it effectively puts them in the same position that you'd have probably raced on the actual Cup cars. And the other one, now you mention it, is that the cars also have an adjustable lower arm. So the lower arm, one part of it holds onto the actual wheel going up and down, one part holds onto the car itself. And in the middle, we have a cut in the arm where we can put extra shims in it to add more camber to the tyres, effectively, to create extra grip, obviously, when you're on circuit, which again is quite special for that period in time.
Engine-wise, I know Porsche quoted much the same power figures for both cars, but they always underquote on their figures, and there are still some specialities or special components in an RS engine.
Absolutely, and you're right, yes, everything from a C2 through to a Turbo S, you put them on a dyno, and they're usually a bit more powerful than Porsche say. But so essentially both cars have got the 3.6 Metzger effectively race engine. So when you look at a car on a ramp, or if the engine's out of it, the bottom end, so the middle of the engine which the cylinder heads bolt onto, is actually very similar to a 964, and in fact the crankshafts would swap out of a 964 to one of these. So that Metzger bottom end that everyone sort of talks about is very, very strong. I mean, the crankshaft in the cars are good for, I think, 980 horsepower. Bear in mind they were rated at sort of a late 300s, early 400s. It's way over engineered. The other difference is that on the 3.6 engines compared to the normal 3.6 Porsche engine of the time is it's a dry sumped unit, which means that it has a separate oil tank, which is sort of round there on the back of the engine, which helps the lubrication and stops the oil swaying about as well with the baffles in there at high speed. So hence you could run these road cars on slicks without it damaging the engine, which is pretty remarkable. So they're rated at 381 horsepower, they've got titanium internals, lightweight, low friction pistons. The car revs to, as I say, 8,200 RPM, so it's over 105 bhp per litre. Yeah. So the
standard engine's already pretty special over and above a Carrera 2, say.
Absolutely, and even when they then up to the 997 generation, it was a evolution of this engine, and even up to the 2012 car, which was the final Metzger, it was still an evolution of this. So yeah, it's cut out of granite.
But the RS?
So the RS, again, we go back to that homologation conversation. The cylinder heads in the 996 RS are actually slightly different to the standard 996 GT3 to allow them to run that on the race car. So Porsche never actually quoted a bhp or torque difference, but by allowing the car to breathe better, it clearly would do. So the bhp differences, whenever we used to dyno them, and we're now starting to do it again, now the cars are sort of coming back into favour, you quite regularly see a normal GT3 anywhere between late 3s and early 400s in terms of bhp. And again, the RS 410, 415 wasn't uncommon. Part of the other differences was that, as we touched on earlier with the aerodynamics, we have a ram air effect.
Yeah, which is greater on the RS because it has that scoop.
The extra intakes. And obviously that's very hard to replicate on a dyno, because the fan in a dyno will never throw enough air at the car like you would on the road. So effectively, as the car's moving faster, it's gulping more air in, a bit like motorbikes do with the air intake on the front of it. So yes, both special engines, but again, when you start to look at the technical differences, you can see where the RS was made better.
Any difference in the exhaust? Because that's obviously part of the efficiency of the engine as well.
Both exhausts are the same on each car, and again, at this sort of period of their life, you sometimes find that they have been upgraded. There are a myriad of different exhaust systems which you can fit, as you know, and some of them actually rob power from the car, because Porsche, when they did the intake and exhaust, they spent a lot of time on it, and we've checked on dynos and found that actually 9 times out of 10 the Porsche one is the best system.
Part of that is because back in those days they weren't trying to deal with Euro emissions laws, so
No.
they could make it as efficient as possible from standard.
Absolutely, they were just looking for reliability and obviously at the time to be the quickest car out there on track days and eventually racing. So as you say, it was less constrained back in the day, I think.
So Greg, a sweet manual gearbox in both cars, but
Yeah.
any differences between them?
Well, yes. So the cars both had the 6-speed manual, as you say, which ran through a limited slip differential with plated diff, which again we can upgrade these days because you tend to find that the original plate's worn. So one interesting fact of both cars is that the gearboxes were designed so that you could actually change the ratios from 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th and 6th to be optimised for your favourite circuit. Unlike the standard C2, the gears were designed not to, so they're fixed in the on the spline, I think it's called. The other interesting part of that is the RS and the GT3 also ran an extra oil cooler on the transmission because it was designed to be driven obviously at 10/10. It just helps with keeping temperatures down for consistency on your track day. They also upgraded some of the internals. I think the steel bulk rings were made of steel so that they could withstand a quicker shift between the cogs. And then you often see that the RSs sometimes have a lightweight clutch and flywheel conversion, which is something we can do to both models, which just further enhances the sort of the reviness of the engine. But apart from that, I think the RS also had shorter ratios in it for slightly better acceleration too.
So Greg, the perennial question about values, and whilst I appreciate they change over time depending on markets, an RS always commands a premium.
Yes.
Is it worth it?
There's two probably answers to that question. Yes is the first fundamental answer, and there's two reasons, should I say, for that. So first of all, you've got the chassis numbers, you know, it's an RS. So they only bought about 113 of the RSs into the UK, whereas about just over 200 of the normal GT3. So on rarity stakes, it's obviously worth more. And also it's always got that cachet of being an RS, which to my knowledge, it's the closest RS road car ever built to race car, because that was the last one that they ran a H pattern box. After that, RS race cars had sequentials. So yes, on that front. You've also got another aspect to it, which is that if you were to add up all of the different technical differences of materials, parts inside the car, the engine differences that we touched on, if you tried to put all of those onto a standard GT3,
it would cost way more than the price difference.
Exactly that. And in days gone by, when the cars were, say, 30 and 45,000 quid respectively, it would cost an absolute fortune to do those bits. So yes, it is the answer, and there's two reasons why it's worth more. Fundamentally because it's technically different, but also on its rarity value. Well, I've bored everyone to tears. It's the bit that everyone wants to watch now, is what they're going to drive like. So, over to you.
Thank you, give me the keys. Well, driving any GT3 is special, and this 996 is a really nice original example. Just 22,754 miles on the clock, and she feels as sharp as a new pin. It's really when you get a GT3 engine that you really feel that pure flat six engine note. The more revs you use, the better it sounds. And this particular car is nice and tight, a lovely gearbox, snicking through the gears. Suspension on this car is firm compared to a normal Carrera, but not uncomfortable. It's just well damped and firm. Everything about a GT3 shouts connection. You can feel the road. The steering is really positive. You really feel connected to the car in a way that people used to talk about a Lotus chassis, for example. But everything is pure, everything is measurable, and everything is highly intoxicating about driving a GT3. it's always been and always will be the ultimate 911. The 996 obviously feels quite small and nippy compared to the bigger cars, 991s, 992s, even 997. It feels like a small, pure sports car. Some might say that 400 horsepower is not a lot by performance car terms, but based on its size, its weight and its tyre size, it's the perfect power to weight combination. 996 GT3, a car I think would make you feel special any time you drove it. Well, I'm now in the GT3 RS. Very similar mileage on this car, 25,600 miles, so very similar. And if the standard GT3 felt special, well, this feels extra special. There's just something more racetrack about it. I don't know whether it's the roll cage. The car just feels a little bit sharper, a bit more urgent. The throttle response, the noise, everything just feels a little bit sharper than it did in the GT3. It could just be this particular example, but there's a bit more engine noise, a bit more exhaust noise, or that's the feeling I have. Maybe it's because it hasn't got so much soundproofing in the car that you're just more aware of it. Still that infectious, lovely flat six engine noise that just makes you want to use more revs all the time. After all, it's a Mexico race engine, why not? There's a bit more feedback through the steering wheel and the seat of your pants. Maybe it's because the car's a little bit lighter, maybe it's because it's a little bit stiffer. We talked about the differences between the RS and the GT3. Can you honestly feel all those little differences? It's hard to say. The cars are very much alike. If it wasn't for this roll cage, there'd be very few indications to me in the driving seat of the differences. However, I can just say it is that bit special. To get in a car that's a Rennsport car is a special feeling. And given the choice, I would always take the Rennsport if I could. Certainly if we were to go to the track, I think I'd notice the differences more. This car is more track focused. GT3, GT3 RS, always was and probably always will be the ultimate analog driver's 911. Well, Greg, thank you very much. You've certainly educated me and hopefully some of you guys as well, although we know you know a lot about your Porsches. It's been a really interesting video and thank you for your time today.